Dear Jeff and Robin, Dean Milberg, my fellow co-organizers, friends from NSSR, I graduated in 2012. I really wish I could be there with you in this celebration of Jeff's career. And what I would like to offer are a few insights from one of the aspects of my work, of my research, that probably would not have been developed without Jeff's inspiration as an advisor, as mentor, and a friend. And this aspect is fiction, or literary fiction, that he mentions in his work, and imagining better futures in dark times. I'll share my screen with you. So we can start. 1 second. Okay. So fiction is not usually tied to activism. Activists usually work to mount evidence as a basis for legitimating their public claims and mobilize audiences near and far. My research is focused on memory activists, and who are not an exception. They use memory practices strategically in order to target the dominant or official memory of their society. Their practices often include documenting, archiving, and collecting testimonies for the aim of preparing a record of violent histories during and after conflict, something which Oli Friedman, Tamar Katrian, and others have also written about. These records are prepared for truth-seeking efforts that often accompany transitions to peace and reconciliation, or for the aim of defending the dominant memory against criticism and change. As different stakeholders struggle over who has the legitimacy to write the national past, a boundary is usually set between fact and fiction. Fact is attached to historical and legal truth, while fiction is linked to cultural and artistic production that is considered to be detached from the real state of events. However, a growing body of artistic and cultural products mixes fiction and documentation practices to impact prevalent perceptions of the actual state of affairs in the present. Moreover, a new mode of memory activist work in recent decades uses fiction as an activist strategy for change. So the question is, my question was, how does fiction work as an activist strategy for social change in public debates that demarcate fact and evidence? More particularly, what happens when memory activist truth and reconciliation efforts are not centered around truth and instead use fiction for publicly addressing past atrocities? In this presentation, I'll try to answer these questions about the activist use of fiction outside of fictional genres by analyzing examples of this new mode of memory work from Israel-Palestine, and if I have time, from Poland as well. This mode that appeared concurrently in both places around 2006 in the context of confronting violent histories seeks to create not only remembrance, but also a memorial intervention into the present, even if only temporarily. The creators use spatial memory practices such as tours, maps, signposting, visual projections, and site-specific performances to reconfigure local and national spaces. Yet, I will argue that temporal relations are the subject of inquiry and intervention. Instilling fragments of the past onto present-day city streets and current residents' daily lives as if the past was indeed part of the present, these artworks raise the question, what if? How would life in the present look like had historical events unfolded differently? There are two examples in the slide, which I can elaborate on later. So I begin with a brief theoretical background, followed by my analysis of very few memorial activist artworks in Israel and hopefully in Poland, and conclude by discussing my findings and the theoretical applications. So I examine memorial interventions in light of the theoretical concept of fictionality that Walsh, Nielsen, Fallon, and Iverson discuss within literature. And I wish to expand this concept beyond cultural production to account for activism. Fictionality is a rhetorical and communicational act of imagining a non-actual setting as an alternative to the actual state of affairs. In its simplest form, fictionality can take the form of the question, what if? Which makes it applicable to examining these memory activist artworks that I studied. Fictionality can also account, for the mixing of fact and fiction. For example, the use of fictional content for documentary purposes, or for the aim of addressing or changing existing social reality. Such use of fictional histories and stories to change prevalent perceptions of the present has been manifested in a growing variety of products in fictional genres like historical and futuristic novels, TV series, and films, yet it is also being used outside of fictional genres, which are not considered as producing detachment from the world, but rather an engagement with it. For example, the 2012 documentary, The Act of Killing, that draws attention to the memory of genocide and continued silencing of survivors. Its director, Joshua Oppenheimer, combines different commemorative forms, including testimony, documents, and reenactment with an inventive use of fiction. So we'll move to these artworks, memory activist artworks that I studied using semi-structured interviews and discourse analysis in Israel, Palestine, and in Poland. And I'll probably have time for Israel, Palestine, very few examples. So I can talk about the similarities between these contexts and differences later on. So the first two memorial interventions in Israel, Palestine that I want to show you today were commissioned by Autobiography of a City, a group of Jewish, Israeli, and Arab Palestinian artists in the binational city of Jaffa, Jewish Arab. And this group designed an internet archive of digital testimonies of the city, of city residents about their life before and during the 48 war that resulted in a Jewish state and a massive displacement of Palestinians, termed the Nakba in Arabic, the catastrophe. One of the works in 2008 was an organized tour by Jewish Israeli artist Yochai Avrahami, with video clips in collaboration with Arab Palestinian artist and filmmaker Skander Kopti. Avrahami organized a bus tour of Jaffa that stopped in different spots in the city, like a regular guided tour. In these stops, the participants met different figures from the city's past or present, who told them stories or showed them local sites and activities they're involved with. Unlike the common touristic experience of Jews and international in Jaffa, many of these sites were neglected, dilapidated, and mundane. And some of these personal stories were fictional or banal. The videos that were shown on the bus in between preparing participants for the next stop also interweaved fact and fiction and replaced the past glory with present banality and wretchedness. I wanted to show you a short excerpt from one of the films. I think it's here. Just to give you a very short example. So I hope you can hear this. This is one of the films on the bus.
אתה רואה סן? זה אחד המונומנטים החשובים ביפו. אחד מתוך 5 פסלים שעיריית תל אביב הניחה ביפו. הפסל הזה ממוקם במרכז הכי חשוב ביפו, מרכז התרבותי והכלכלי של יפו. מרכז הומי אדם, שכולם יעברו ויראו ויתגאו בפסל הזה של אהובנו ריפעת טורק. ההנדרטה הזאת היא על שמו של השחקן האגדי היפואי ריפעת טורק. ואיך שאתה רואה, הרי הפסל הזה מנציח את הרגע של הבעיטה האדירה של ריפעת טורק במשחקו נגד בית"ר ירושלים, לא זוכר בדיוק באיזה שנה, שהוא הכניע את בית"ר ירושלים 2-1 בדקה ה-92. אתה רואה, סן? הפסל הזה הוא בעצם פה כדי להזכיר לנו, לכל תושבי יפו, הערבים, שאתה בטח יודע את מידת יריבותם לקבוצת בית"ר ירושלים. זה הרגע שבו אנחנו ניצחנו את בית"ר ירושלים, ואת זה אנחנו נזכור לעד וננציח את זה בצורת הפסל הזה של ריפעת טורק.
Okay, going back to the slide show. So, yes. So in this video, Kopti introduces to his puppet son a statue's history, attaching symbolic national meaning for the Palestinian minority and aesthetic value to it. Kopti combines a tour guide's knowledge with family storytelling against the background of passing cars and a dilapidated surrounding. So he tells us this is the center of the city, but we see that it definitely is not. Bringing the ethos of a tour guide and father to a semi-deserted, neglected neighborhood turns the site, the statue, and the content of the story into a parody. The clips on the bus also resemble the old-time Israeli TV show Sami and Susu, which was the ultimate symbol of Jewish-Palestinian coexistence. So Avrami and Kopti used different memory practices in the bus tour, testimonies and storytelling, the guided tour, a search of family roots, and even a ceremony that mimics state commemoration to present a very different, almost opposite content than anticipated. Mixing the past and the present and producing knowledge and imagination that greatly differ both from touristic experience and from the national narrative of Jews and Palestinians regarding Jaffa. The mixing of fiction and seemingly factual and authoritative forms of displaying knowledge appear in other projects by Autobiography of a City. This project, Autobiographies Jaffa 2030, so the city in the year 2030, contains map, tours, and visitor center. It was a part of citywide events of the Province Artistic Project, and the group launched a map that shows Jaffa as a city embedded in a different context than the present one, an Arab Middle Eastern world, its context before 48. To its imagined future in 2030. So the future here is based on the past. The map was the basis for a pop-up visitors center in the Saraya Arabic Hebrew Theater in Jaffa, from which one could register for tours of the city in 2030. So I'm quoting from the visitors center website. Come visit a city we don't live in still, but we would ask ourselves how we might. And you have this quote there. Here, mapping, the scientific tool that draws national borders between populations living in a shared space, is used to lift borders and free Jaffa from its binding Israeli borders within and without, and reunite it with the region. Based on its pre-state past, Jaffa 2030 is imagined to be a cosmopolitan city that accommodates various populations excluded from the borders of the nation state, and that is connected to urban centers from Beirut, Cairo, and Damascus to Barcelona and Marseille. Another project that I'll again show you very briefly is by Zochrot, a memory activism group that organizes walking tours of destroyed Palestinian villages and neighborhoods from the 48 war around Israel. Zochrot also initiates artistic and literary projects, one of which is Bridging Memory from 2007, which instilled real-size photos of 13 Palestinian refugees from the Al-Khilwa refugee camp in Lebanon onto their pre-48 villages in Israel. And here you see the process, yes?
2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So you see the process. The refugees are photographed by Thierry Bressilot, who's a French photographer in the refugee camp, and their human-sized photos are presented in the what is today Kerem Ben Zimra, but their original village, Ras El Ahmar, in Israel. So this symbolic return of refugees to their villages helps us visualize who the refugees are and what would a shared life would look like if the Nakba didn't happen. I'm moving to the conclusion. So by raising the question, what if the memorial interventions we saw reconfigured temporal relations as the nationally framed linear connection between a past, a present, and a future is opened for examination and fused with imagination. Opening the linear trajectory of official history to imagination inserts fiction into the dominant historical record as a way of questioning its validity or authority. Moreover, mixing fact and fiction, the utilization of fiction outside of fictional genres for envisioning, documenting, and intervening in reality has a unique political potential. It invites emotional and imaginative reactions that are not limited to the concepts, positions, and tropes that frame the dominant debate about the past. However, the question, what if, is extremely hypothetical. There's no cost in imagining what would life together would be like if it doesn't happen in reality, especially when it is raised only by one of the sides, one of the groups involved in the difficult past at issue without the other. So Jews without Palestinians, Poles without Jews in Poland. It is hypothetical yet participatory and interactive. It reveals the artificial constructedness and political ideology behind existing attitudes to suffering and difference in the dominant political discourse and memory of the contested past. And it also deconstructs this constructedness is of any and all memory. So it also deconstructs both history and memory without offering a new narrative to replace the dominant one. So that has implications as well. Thank you.